And then the judge delivered the sentence.
I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I am not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. A trial court judge, the job of a trial court judge is to apply the law to specific facts and to deal with individual cases. And so, Mr. Chauvin, as to count one, based on the verdict of the jury, finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute section 609.04, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd.
270 months is 22 and a half years. Derek Chauvin is still facing federal charges in the death of George Floyd, which could bring a much longer sentence. Joining us now are the lead prosecutors of the Derek Chauvin trial, Jerry Blackwell and Steve Schlischer. Thank you both very much for joining us tonight. And Jerry Blackwell, let me begin with you, since this was your very first case as a prosecutor. This is the very first time you've been involved in sentencing and, in effect, sending someone to prison. What was your reaction to the sentence?
Well, my reaction was a sense of peace, Lawrence. I suppose is the word I would use, a sense that there had been a measure of justice obtained. As you know, it's difficult to convict a police officer in the first place. And if you look at the history of police officers convicted of the unreasonable use of deadly force, this 22 and a half years is right up there at the top of any officer ever convicted of this in the country. And the fact that the judge tacked on top of what would be a typical sentence of 12 and a half years speaks both to the court's attempt to follow the guidelines and finding that there are aggravating factors that justified an upward departure of 10 plus years. So nothing will bring George Floyd back. So no number of years will do that. But if we can do what we can in the law to approximate some kind of justice, I think that we can all feel good about the fact that there was a conviction and that the judge put it in the upper range of convictions of this sort ever in the history of America.
Steve Schlischer, as a former prosecutor and now special prosecutor, you've been through sentencing sessions many times before. What did you expect going into this one, and how did it feel for you when you heard that 270 months from the judge?
Oh, I expected, I guess, when the family spoke, that to be powerful for the judge and for everybody watching, and I think that was borne out. I mean, the words of his daughter, Gianna, the expression from Philonise and Terrence and Brandon about what they lost, I think, was something that really resonated. And it's something that can only be appreciated, I guess, from the position of people who've actually felt the loss, especially with Gianna and talking about what she's lost with a father. And I was particularly moved when Philonise spoke about her missing those moments with her father, the Sweet 16 parties, the father-daughter dances and prom and walking down the aisle. And it was very powerful. When I heard this sentence pronounced, I shared Jerry's sentiment. It was a feeling that we'd achieved a measure of justice. No number is going to quite capture the enormity of the loss that's felt by the Floyd family, or frankly, the enormity of this case. but 22 and a half years is a substantial sentence. It's a long time. And it reflected the seriousness of this matter and the effect that it's had on the Floyd family and the whole world.
The judge recessed to collect his final thoughts about this. He came back into the courtroom with an over 20-page written memo about the sentence already written, so he may have plugged in the numbers at the last minute. He could have done that, but he clearly had already thought about all of the evidence in this case. And one thing that I was really struck by in reading the judge's memo all the way through is how completely he embraced every element of the case you presented, saying that it was proved beyond a reasonable doubt. And I just want to read this one entry for the audience about how specifically and closely the judge has accepted every bit of the key evidence in the case. He said, the slow death of George Floyd, occurring over approximately 6 minutes of his positional asphyxia, was particularly cruel in that Mr. Floyd was begging for his life and obviously terrified by the knowledge that he was likely to die, but during which the defendant objectively remained indifferent to Mr. Floyd's pleas. And Jerry Blackwell, in that passage alone, there are several days of testimony, including expert testimony, Darnella Fraser's video. There's so much evidence that he incorporates into that passage that you presented and adopts fully as proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
No, absolutely, Lawrence. Couldn't agree more with that, and it's consistent with the overarching message that we had throughout the entire trial, starting in the opening statements, that you can believe your eyes. This is homicide. It's murder. So the court saw what we all saw, heard the testimony, and the arc of this trial was simply having the jurors, the court, the public, to understand that what you thought you saw in that video is, in fact, what you saw. A man screaming, pleading for his life, who was simply being choked out, asphyxiated one breath at a time. So the court got that. The court made those findings consistent with the evidence, proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and we think that was absolutely correct.
Steve Schlischer, both of you were in private practice when the Attorney General asked you to come in to handle this case. How did you feel today at the end of that session about your decision, the decision both of you made, to come back for you to come back into the prosecutor's office to handle this case?
Grateful. I was grateful to be called back into public service. And as I heard the sentence and as I read also, the judge's order, recall that he placed great emphasis on the violation of the position of authority that Derek Chauvin was in. And as a former public servant, and in this capacity, we're both public servants, public service is something that's important. And public service is a public trust. The abuse of authority in this case was such a gross violation of that public trust. And the judge acknowledged in his order that it made the crime worse, and it was justification for giving a greater sentence, that frankly, that crime couldn't have happened without Derek Chauvin being in a position of authority. In any other situation, the victim would have had the option of resisting their attacker, but George Floyd was not in a position to be able to resist his attacker because his attacker was a police officer.
Or the bystanders would have gotten such an attacker off from George Floyd.
Absolutely.
But for his authority.
And with that, the uniform and what that signifies, the power of the government, the power of the state, to use that to actually facilitate the crime, it did make it worse. And so as I heard the judge reflecting on this and thinking about that call that Keith Ellison made to both of us, I was grateful to be able to be a part of a process that is going to take a step towards restoring that public trust that was so violated on that day.
Jerry Blackwell, a quick last word from you about from the moment you got that call from Keith Ellison to today, how you feel about that decision you made to do this.
It's the absolute best professional decision I've made in my entire career as a lawyer. And in a sense, I feel that it's the culmination of all of the cases I've been involved in up to this point, defending, frankly, companies in cases that involve difficult witnesses, difficult documents, difficult narratives. All of that experience came to bear, where we had certainly definite challenges in this case in attempting to convict a police officer. So I felt this was the culmination, frankly, of everything I have done in the practice of law up to this point. And I was grateful to be able to serve this way.
Jerry Blackwell and Steve Swisher, one way to read that judge's memo today is a real commendation for your work in that courtroom. He adopted every bit of the evidence that you presented and adopted it beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you both very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you,
Happy
Lawrence.
to be on.
Thank you. Thank you.